everyone. My name is Clara Bodek, or Bruria Bodek Felix. I was born in Hungary in 1931. When I was 12, the world changed. I come from a very large family, and all of a sudden we were not allowed to visit our family. Jews were not allowed on trains. Jewish children were not allowed to attend school, and there are other things not allowed. All of a sudden, my father was arrested. He was hiding out in Budapest because he wasn't a Hungarian citizen. He couldn't be a citizen because his father was not a citizen. So the first people they gathered, the Hungarian Iron Cross, were the non-citizens, the foreigners. And if you know anything about European history, the Austrian-Hungarian Empire was a very large conglomeration of different countries. And when that fell, every country claimed the land they thought that was theirs and set their own rules, and the Hungarian rule was what I just told you. I couldn't understand why all of a sudden my father didn't come home. Gradually, when the Nazis took over Hungary, we had to move out of our little town, Kenderes, which was the birthplace of Horthy, who tried to save the Jews, but once the Hungarian Nazis took over, he wasn't allowed to do any more guiding of his people. We had to pack up and join my grandparents. Both my father and grandfather were rabbis, Orthodox rabbis, heads of communities. My father had a community of 10 Jewish families. But according to Jewish custom, wherever there are 10 men, there need a leader, a prayer leader and else. There were no Jewish children, they all went to the big cities. So we were the only children who were school age. And I attended Catholic schools, because there were no more Jewish schools. My family preferred the Catholic schools because it was told to us that they were our friends. I remember the nun who taught me in kindergarten, long, dark clothes. She taught me the directions. In front of me is north and so forth. And I still remember it with really fondness. My grandparents, my grandfather was in his 70s. He was the rabbi of a community of 34 families. So we joined in the ghetto that we were forced into gathering. The whole Jewish family of that town had to get into or move into the area of the temple. Every day something new happened. All of a sudden we had a guard in the yard that was armed, and he was watching what we were doing. When we asked him, "What are you doing here?" he said, "Well, he's there to save us if anybody wants to do us any harm." It was around Passover time, and we were all of a sudden loaded up on horse and buggies, not the kind you see in the movies, but farm wagons that were used for carrying hay and all kinds of other feed for the animals. And we were driven to a ghetto. That was another world again. I was wondering why, and we were always told just for the benefit of us, to save us from the airplanes and all of that. There were hundreds and hundreds of people in that ghetto. They shaved the women, they shaved the men. And can you imagine, if you know any Orthodox Jews with a long beard and always wearing to cover their heads, all of a sudden everybody was shaven, and it was a frightening scene. And these days a lot of people shave their head, but at that time this was absolutely frightening. No sooner we were loaded up again on wagons and were taken to Austria. We went to a disinfection camp. Some people came out of the showers and some didn't. They were victims of gassing. We were lucky. Much of our clothes and belongings were stolen, even though we were allowed to take only as much as we can carry in 2 hands. My mother still has a feather bed she carried all along. A feather cover, like a comforter. God bless her, my mother will be 104 years old next month. She does not want to talk about the experience. She felt that it is in the past and that's where it should be. But many of us survivors struggled with the memories. You can't just say, forget it. How do you forget it? You don't forget it. The only thing you can do is deny the power that it had over you. Every or any experience that was the worst one in your life, and that you remember, and anything around you can remind you of, maybe, God forbid, a car accident, a fire, a fall, whatever. The worst thing you consider your event is your Holocaust. So mine was a little bit extraordinary. I worked on making sure that I can step out of that memory whenever I want to, just like that. Take a step to the side and don't let it run your life. Therefore, you can actually be a help to other people. You can be an active bystander. Don't just be a bystander. Luckily, there were a lot of families, non-Jewish families, who helped hundreds of people around Europe. France even designed a method of taking in Jewish children and making marking them in coded books, so that if the Nazis or the Germans come to look for Jewish children, they wouldn't find them, because their names and age was changed and coded with new codes. In Hungary, there were houses that were marked with yellow crosses, meaning that those were safe houses. In Poland, many people risked their lives. Churches risked their condition or their community by saving a lot of Jewish children. Israel is thanking these people all their lives and their children. They were not the bystanders. If we are going to be active and help or be aware of what's going on, and we say something, maybe we can prevent another Holocaust. Especially these days that there are so many events happening all over the world. Perhaps we can help. Even a thought helps. A communal thought building on your principle of being there for those who need it will help. So we were taken from that disinfection camp to a work camp, a labor camp in Austria, just in time to be saved from being exterminated in Auschwitz. I'm sure you heard of Auschwitz. It was the worst, or recognized to be the worst extermination camp. And many of the Hungarian Jews were already exterminated in Austria, in Auschwitz, in Poland. If I can just estimate the number of people I lost in my family, I would say it's over 500. My grandmother had 12 children, and they all had children and children. There is a Hungarian writer who wrote a very tiny book, and didn't bring his name, but he wrote a Kaddish for a child on board. Kaddish is the morning prayer for a Jew who died. So can you imagine how many children would have been born by 6 million people? And I must say there weren't just 6 million, there were more than 12 million people who were not Jews, who did one thing or another. We had a neighbor who was here in Wapinges Falls from Poland who were arrested because they dared to use one of the little baby pigs for Easter. And they were caught by the Nazis. So there were atrocities all over Europe. May their memories be blessed. By being saved from Auschwitz, came through the Eichmann bunch group, who made a deal with a Hungarian Jew to supply the German army with money, which ended up really in their pockets, and also with machinery, because the war was ending. Germany was very low in ammunition, and war machinery and whatever they needed for it. So they used the Hungarian Jews' money in order to save the war, in lieu of not sending any more people to Auschwitz. And my immediate family is one of them. My grandparents, who were in their 70s, 2 aunts, my mother with 6 children, expecting the 7th or the 9th, because 2 of my siblings were sent to Auschwitz with my paternal grandparents. From the work, when the winter came, the work camp, it was too cold to work outside in the fields. So we were taken to Bergen-Belsen. That's another infamous camp. We were there for 6 months. We were in a Sonderlager because we came from Hungary, and we had other privileges. The Swiss supplied medicine and trucks to the Germans in exchange of keeping up alive. Anne Frank, many of you must have heard the name, was in a camp right opposite us. There were different camps for the Dutch, for the Hungarian, for the Sonderlager, which means a special camp that I was in, and for people who have been used up through hard labor for many years, from Poland, Czechoslovakia, Romania, Germany, I don't know if I mentioned Poland, but people who have really suffered a lot more than I would say I did. And I'm very grateful, and I feel that I owe them a hats off for surviving. If you have heard about the Warsaw Ghetto, which is not just recently is the anniversary of it, that was a great struggle. There were people who hid in the woods, who break out of trains, who broke out of concentration camps, but eventually the bystanders did not help around the camps, except the ones who really made it their business to help. Coming out of Bergen-Belsen around this month actually, today is the 11th, around maybe 2 days ago, we were taken out in trains to send us to Theresienstadt, which was an extermination camp, and the Germans wanted to be ahead of the Allies, and they determined that they'll bring us with the train to Theresienstadt and kill us all before the Allies crossed the river. Luckily, the Allies already crossed the river, so we got stuck in a very beautiful valley. God does have a beautiful world. And now this is with the mind of a 13-year-old. I didn't dwell on the suffering as I dwelt of what's happening around me more. So this was one of the wonders I dwelled into. And we got stuck there for several days without food and water, and in the trains, many of the trains were cattle cars where there were 80 people locked up without toilets and food and water. Because we were in a special camp, we were in passenger trains, where also in one little cabin might have been 8 to 10 people, but at least it wasn't, we didn't have the same fate as the cattle car trains. All of a sudden we didn't see the Nazis around us, the guards who were guarding the trains. But one day we did see on the hill opposite the train a whole row of American soldiers. We didn't know first who they were, but it was like a tight fence of people standing up on the hill and rolling down all kinds of stuff in cans, bread in cans, meat in cans. I mean, you know, coming from a small town in Hungary, I've never seen a can. I never see chewing gum or whatever. And soon enough, we were discovered by several soldiers, and I was hoping that this liberator would be coming here tonight, but unfortunately he contracted pneumonia and he's still recuperating. But his group were scouting around for runaway Nazis in tanks, 3 American tanks of the 30th Infantry Division were running around looking for runaway Nazis, and they stumbled on the train. We could have probably been perished, if they would not have discovered us. And so they helped us, took us into one of the neighboring towns, set up hospitals, food service, you name it, we were very well taken care of. Many people died from infections and all kinds of intestinal illnesses because the food we ate was not suitable for human consumption, and so when real good food came, that was also offensive to the stomachs. My grandfather died there and buried there in Willersleben, which is near Magdeburg, if you know, Germany. And we were discovered on the 13th of April, 1945. It was a glorious day. It was as if the other things never happened in my child's eye. We do meet together, the survivors, several times a year. one of the teachers in Hudson Falls teaches the Holocaust. If you're interested to pursue the discovery of the train, you can go on Google and look up history, teaching history matters. The whole story of the train is on. It's really worthwhile to see it. Now in my life, I'm very happy. I have two wonderful children, Danielle and Sandy. And three wonderful grandchildren and a new daughter-in-law. I took it on myself to bear witness whenever I'm asked, because this cannot be forgiven and forgotten, even though many times people say forget and, you can't, because if a wise man said, if we don't know our history, we're bound to repeat it. I want to thank you for listening to me. It is a healing for me as well, when I can talk about it and impress you on the fact that you can go through a lot of trouble, but you can also avoid letting it run your life. Just look ahead and be an active person rather than a bystander. Thank
you. We have a few minutes for questions from the audience for Dr. Fowler. Yes.
Aside from your mother, how many members of your family survived the Holocaust?
My grandmother survived Bergen-Belsen. My grandmother, two aunts. One aunt had two children. Her husband didn't come back. My mother and 6 of us. The baby was born in the work camp, and I want to express the thanks to the Czech lady who helped her when the baby was born. We lived in a silo, slept on straw. Our sheets were stolen burlap bags that we used to gather the sugar beets in, and we were all out working, gathering sugar beets. And my mother stayed back in the cabin because she was so pregnant. And this lady from next door must have been watching us. And she would bring my mother all kinds of nutritional food, because all we ate was once a day a mishmash of vegetables, what you could call ratatouille. And I, for years, didn't eat carrots. I had so much carrots there that I couldn't look at another carrot. And at night, she would sneak up to our hall, to our building, and leave things for my mother and for the baby. We never saw her. I guess my mother might have, because we were not there. Or at night, we couldn't see her. But we knew she was coming because the guards, we were enclosed, so the guards had dogs. And whenever the dog started to bark, we knew that lady is coming. And after seconds, the dog stopped barking. And we figured out she must have thrown something for the dogs, and the dogs quieted down so she could do the good deed that she had to do. And I tried to reach her, but unfortunately by the time I wanted to, she passed away. But my mother supported her son and his families for many years.
Other questions in the back?
How did you stay in contact with the man
liberated us. 2 years ago, on the 13th of April, 1910 it would be, I got a phone call. I'm sorry, 2000. That was a little early. I had a phone call from my sister who lives in Israel. I was sitting in my car getting ready for a Holocaust Memorial evening in Woodstock, New York. And she called me on my cell phone saying that I would not believe it, but one of the major papers in Israel has a 2-page, middle pages about the train of death, which trains were called the death trains. And she is about 5 years younger than I am, and she says the story is just exactly as you kept on telling us, because they always ask me, I'm the oldest, so my sisters ask me all the time about this and that. And she gave me the name of the person, of the soldier, who took care of us after we were discovered. And I called him. He lives in Florida. He's a historian. He was here 2 years ago, actually, in Rhinebeck, talking to one of the senior residences as one of the programs that residence has provided for their members. And he told me he'll be in New York. I said, wherever you'll be in New York, I want to meet you. I didn't know he was so close. I thought he'll be in Albany or something like that, which is not too far either. But I went to that event and we met. And it was, I can't even tell you how good it felt to actually hug somebody who saved my life. I mean, I'm so grateful to him and his group, because there are a few still living members of the 30th Infantry Division. So if you know anybody from that, they welcome always new people who haven't yet been recognized. We meet several, as I mentioned, several times a year with the survivors. And it's just a wonderful experience.
Any other questions? Right here?
Where did your family migrate to after you were liberated?
Okay, we were in Hillersleben in Germany, and that area was supposed to go over to the Russians. And because the Allies divided Germany. And that place was supposed to go over to the Russians, and we heard so many bad things about the Russians, with theft and raping and all kinds of stuff. We had to decide where we're going. My grandmother and my aunts wanted to go back to Hungary, and so did my mother. But I was always, they called me the stubborn one, and I missed my profession. Instead of psychologist, I should have been a lawyer. Because I told my mother that I'm going to Israel. It was only about 15 or so, 14. And I was stubborn about it, and I told her that if she doesn't, she can go back to Hungary and I'm going to Israel. And so I convinced her that their mother should stay with their children. And so we were on the way to Israel, but the British did not allow Jewish immigration to, at that time, Palestine. And we went through Holland and we got stuck in Belgium, waiting for a better day. After 1948, the borders opened up after Israel's independence. And I then went to Israel on a with the youth group, Youth Aliyah. And my mother stayed in Belgium, and then subsequently she remarried. My father was killed in labor camp, and her husband did not want to go to Israel. So my two sisters came after me 1 year later. So the three of us, three sisters, and the three of us lived in Israel. One, I'm saying because I have two sisters in Israel and one in France. One of the three who came to Israel.
I got a question in the back?
Yeah, when did you move to the United States?
In 1955, when I was in Israel, I went 2 years to agricultural school. And then when I was almost 18, I enlisted in the Israeli Air Force. I was in the Israeli Air Force for 5 years. I didn't fly by myself. I was the office manager for the chief of supplies in the Israeli Air Force. It was a great experience, and when my then fiancé decided to come and study in the US, I preceded his coming here, and then he came later on, and we stayed. We always wanted to go back, but there are always circumstances that postpone those decisions.
Okay, time for one more question. Anyone? Okay. Thank you, Dr. Miller.
I just want to say the last word. They always say I want to say the last word. I want to thank you for being here. I want to thank Marist College, a college with a heart, and with all the people who have given up their evening to listen to my story. I wish you all the best, and only think of the good things in life and look forward to whatever may come with a good, positive spirit.